Welcome to the Room of Lives. I'm your host, Neil. In the last episode, we spoke with Othniel, a pastor from Haiti and the Bahamas, about coincidences, science, and witchcraft in the Caribbean. Today, we are speaking with Dr. Brent Crossan as a sort of natural continuation of that. Brent got his PhD in anthropology from UC Santa Cruz and is now associate professor in the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Texas at Austin. He is the author of the book Experiments with Power, which is about the intersection of power and politics with the spiritual practice called Obeah in Trinidad. This book was the winner of the 2021 Clifford Geertz Prize for the best book in the anthropology of religion and was shortlisted for the 2021 Albert J. Raboteau Prize for the best book in Africana religions. Brent's interests lie in African and Caribbean religions, the intersection of science and religion, and the colonial regulation of religion. I met Brent when I started taking his course called Science, Religion, and Magic. But then COVID struck and classes ended and I didn't see him anymore. But I knew I wanted him on my podcast, so I made a note of it on my phone. Years passed, then a few weeks back, I was invited by my friend to this show where this lady was playing the theremin, a weird electrical instrument, and giving a presentation on it. During the show, there was this guy sitting in the corner who would keep interrupting her, saying that her presentation was bad and we should talk about something else like sports. I was starting to get annoyed and began to debate the merits and demerits of calling him out. The next time he opened his mouth, I yelled straight back, "Could you please stop interrupting her?" And he sort of shut up. At the end of the show, the guy sitting next to me appreciated my move and we started talking. Then it turned out that he was Brent, and he in fact remembered me from his class, and I invited him to my podcast right there, and he agreed. So a few days ago, I went to his house and we had this conversation. We start with two stories on coincidence about a motorcycle and an alligator. Then Brent tells me his life story about his supernatural experiences, about leaving home, working with a traveling carnival, and being homeless, and studying Hinduism in India and the Caribbean. We talk about the connection between science, magic, and spiritual practices, and I ask him, "What are your religious views, and what do you think will happen to you after you die?" Okay, so let me first start by telling you the story of what happened to me today. So my friends and I, we went to this state park and I rode my motorcycle there, my friend rode his, and there was a group of other people who came by car. And it was this place called Commons Ford Ranch Park. And I had never been there, it was very nice. And we went down a hike and then we got in the water. And then we are coming back and we're just waiting in the parking lot. And then I noticed that I have done something stupid that I have done several times already, which is I leave my key of my motorcycle dangling from the keyhole, which opens the bottom of the seat. It's the same key. So I do this a lot of the time where I get out the motorcycle and I have to take my seat out to put my helmet in. And then I, put the seat back and I forget to take my key. And I've done this multiple times in the past. So a person can just come and see that there's a key dangling and they can just ride off with the motorcycle. And I've done this on 6th Street and I've come back in the middle of party, all of those people I come back, I'm like, oh my God, my key was here. So I realized that I did that in the parking lot again. And I told my friends, oh my God, look what I did again. I left my key there. And my other friend who rides a motorcycle, his girlfriend, Alex, was there. And Alex is normally a little bit more reserved, but for whatever reason, she saw that and she came up to me and she made this gesture of like shaking me. And she said, Neil, you cannot afford to get your motorcycle stolen again. Because my previous motorcycle was stolen. Although that wasn't because of the key. Someone just came and broke the steering and just took it. And so she said that. She was like, you cannot afford to get your motorcycle stolen again. And she was being like extra. And I'm like, oh, Alex's girlfriend is normally not this expressive with me. You know? And so she said that. And then I got a phone call. And I take the phone out of my pocket and it says unknown. And I'm like, that's so spammy. Like, I'm not going to pick up a call that says unknown. Like, even when there's a number on it, it's a lot of the times an unknown number is scam or spam. And this one doesn't even have a number. So I started showing it to my friends. I'm like, does anyone want to talk to unknown on my phone? And people are like, no. And then my friend, the motorcycle guy, he was like, okay, I'll pick up. And he like picks it up and I go back towards my motorcycle because I'm not interested in this call. And the first thing I hear is there's a human being on the other end. And I'm like, oh, shit, maybe that call is for me. And I either hear him saying it or Sid says it, like detective. He says, detective, huh? And then Sid gives me the phone. And I take the phone and he's like, I'm calling from Mr. Das. I say, yeah, that's me. And he said, did your motorcycle get stolen? I was like, yeah. He said, we have recovered it. I was like, on the phone, I was like, whoa, that's such a coincidence, because just now before you called, someone just mentioned motorcycle being stolen, and right at that moment you called. And I was like, okay. And I was like, okay, well, he's just a detective. He's not very excited about this thing. So I'm like, okay, what do I do? He was like, yeah, you go to the place and then you like get your motorcycle. And he said they busted out the ignition, but they put a new ignition, but it's drivable. And he said, we got it from Palmer Lane, and that's it. He would not. I kept asking. I was like, how did you get it? Who was it? And he's like, so yeah, this is just my job. This is what I do. And he didn't say anything. He just said, we got it off Palmer Lane. And then we get out of there, my friend and I, on our motorcycles, and I drive my new motorcycle, the one that I currently have, back home. And then he takes me behind his motorcycle, and we go all the way to the impound place. Now, I do not like interacting with towing company people.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's a pain in the ass because of previous experiences I've had. And I go up there, and he's like, okay, you can go and take a look at the motorcycle. I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to drive it out of here. If they busted the ignition, I don't know. And they have put a new key in, I don't know how. So I was like, I want to look at it first before I pay you. And he was like, okay, you go in. And then I went in, and I'm looking for it. And then my friend said, is it this one? And I noticed, and I'm like, wow, that looks like a different motorcycle. They had painted, it used to be sky blue. They have like painted it black. They've changed some of the parts. They have put like handlebar ends. They've put something that's like a charging cable on top where you can charge your phone. You can charge your phone. They put some like nice handlebars, but it definitely doesn't look aesthetically as pretty to me because mine was sky blue. And one of the mirrors is missing. The other one is a different one. And yeah. So I tried to start it and it like immediately stalls. I'm like, oh, this one had like a sensitive clutch. So I like figured it out. And then I was like, I was kind of north. So I'm like, should I come directly to your house? But it would be a little bit early. And I didn't really know this bike.
Mm-hmm.
There was an extra switch on the side. I still don't know what it does. There's just a switch on top of the engine. Oh, by the way, the key was in the motorcycle. So I was like, how did they like get the motorcycle and the key is in it? Do you think they caught the guy? And the towing company place was like, yeah, probably they caught the guy. And the key is on a keychain that has a bullet on it. It's not a real bullet, but it's like, looks like a bullet, like golden and silver, and it's on the keychain. I'm like, oh yeah, these are thugs. I'm like, I wouldn't do this. I wouldn't like spray paint gold and black on my motorcycle and like have a bullet thing. Yeah, I feel like different vibes now on this motorcycle. I'm like, this is not really my vibes. Anyway, but it still runs fine. Oh, and I like the sound of the exhaust, so I'm going to swap it out with my current one.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So, yeah, that for me was an example of something kind of magical.
Mm-hmm.
That where it's like, yeah, the universe like kind of like played with me a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just thinking, this is my tea, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just thinking that I feel sometimes like if there is a God who is controlling the script of everything, then this God has, for me, in the way that my life is unfolding, this God has kind of a sense of humor that's similar to my own sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like if I were a God that shaped a person's life, I would put in shit like this. Mm. Just like, yeah. Okay. So, question for you.
No, I was going to say I had a similar experience when I was in Florida of a coincidence. I mean, it was a fairly small coincidence, but we went to the Ishnatukni River Springs. It's like a pure spring-fed river, kind of like the San Marcos River, so it's like crystal clear. But we went to one of the springs that feeds it, and it was like me and three other people. And we were just getting in the water, and I was with someone who had never been to Florida and was like kind of freaked out about it. Mm. Like she was looking up shark attacks like before she went, and she found, because there had been a shark attack in the national news, and so she was like, I saw the browser, and she was like looking up the beach town where the shark attack happened, and she was like, there's alligators everywhere, and I was like, yeah, but for me it's like I really like that intimacy with those kinds of creatures. Mm. But we're in the spring, and springs are like really cold water. It's like the springs here, and so you like, I've never seen an alligator in a spring because it's just too cold for them. Mm-hmm. Like they'll be more in the rivers and lakes, and so we were swimming around, and we had these goggles because you can see everything, and people say, oh, I saw this fish, or I saw a turtle, and then I was like, did you see the alligator? I was just doing it to like mess with my friend, and they're like, oh, you're just fucking with me. And then my other friend turned around and she's like, whoa, did you see that alligator? And then like we all looked, and there was an alligator there, and we're like, wow, that's really weird, because like alligators never come to springs because the water's too cold for them. And it was a pretty small alligator, like an adolescent alligator. So I'm like, wow, that's crazy, It's like, I was just screwing around, and then there's an alligator. And then we get out of the springs, and there are these people that had like been eyewitnesses to the shark attack that my friend had, Google searched for. And they were like, yeah, the woman was just in the water, and she was like swatting at the shark, and the shark would keep circling around, and she would like swat it away, and it finally bit her. And they said, yeah, and she came back to the beach the next day with stitches, and she was just really mad that she couldn't get in the water again because she had stitches. It's like a convergence of like Florida animal encounters. That
Yeah, Florida people are weird too. I've seen some like, I don't know, like funny joke videos on the internet of like just shit that Florida people do. It's a little derogatory. Yeah. Okay, so question. So my first question is, can you give me a 15-minute life story? Like your childhood upbringing, hobbies, friends, what the world was like as you were growing up, maybe your parents, whatever you feel comfortable talking about, your ideas, interests, and what your like path has been to like where you're now, like personally and professionally.
Yeah.
However much of it you want to.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, I was born in Kansas City, Kansas. And this is in like the late 70s. And my family was there because my father was working at the military prison, like the main, I don't know if it's the only one, but the main military prison for people that go AWOL or commit some crime that are in the military is in Leavenworth, Kansas, which is outside of Kansas City, Kansas. And so he had been trained as a psychologist and was like drafted into the Vietnam War, but then the war was just ending. So then he was working in like the military system as a psychologist. So I was born there, and I don't remember much because we only lived there 2 or 3 years. But the memory that I do have over there is that my sister was born 2 years after me, and I remember the first memory I have is going into the hospital in a snowstorm, and then going inside and holding my sister. And I just remember being really happy. But there's also a photograph of me holding her, and so I don't know like if that's the memory I have or if it's me looking at the photograph in which I'm smiling and look happy holding my sister. If that photograph like somehow shaped my memory. But then we moved to Oklahoma, then to St. Louis, and then to Florida. And so I think for me, like my sense of home, the kind of natural environment I feel connected to is Florida. And so even though I don't really have any family or much family left there, I still go back there and like visit friends and think of that as home. So I grew up in Gainesville, Florida. And I think some of the strongest memories I have of having, experiences that convinced me there was something like magic or the supernatural, because that's what you asked. That was one of the things you wanted to talk about, was when I was a teenager, and a friend of mine and I would meet every year in this small park in downtown Gainesville, in kind of like the oldest neighborhood. And we would always meet on midnight of Christmas Eve. And so it was like the quietest night because everything was closed and the streets were totally empty. And we would start in the park, and then we'd set out walking like through this neighborhood with these kind of old houses from the late 1800s. And so one year, I remember we started by going on the swing set because it had these swings with really long chains, and we'd swing on them. And then we were walking around down the street. And the streets there have these like live oak boughs that kind of arch over them, and Spanish moss hangs off of them. I remember we were walking towards, like through this tree tunnel towards something that was like a lit up parking garage at the end of the tunnel. And all of a sudden there was like a flash of lightning or a flash of light. And, and I was standing up with my eyes open, but then I kind of just like went away. somewhere
What went
else.
away?
Huh?
Who went away?
I went away. Like
You
I
went
felt,
away.
Yeah, I feel like I went away somewhere else, and it kind of felt like being in outer space or something, but it didn't feel like I had like I exist. It didn't feel like I existed as something that could move from one place to another, and like time stopped existing. So I was like out of time, and it just felt like it felt like being in outer space or something, like just floating.
And you didn't have a body.
Yeah, I didn't feel like I didn't have a body or a sense of self.
Yeah.
Even it was just kind of like a.
But, well, were you seeing anything? Was there something to see?
No, there was nothing to see. There was nothing to see. There was no time. There was no like feeling of being in a place.
But there is consciousness, like.
Yeah, because I can kind of remember what that feeling was like.
Yeah, and there's memory of it.
Yeah. So anyway, then I come back, and I'm just standing there with my eyes open again. So I don't know how much time has passed, but I look at my friend, and she looked at me, and we just from eye contact, like we knew that we had just experienced the same thing.
Both.
Yeah. And then we just like took off running, and it started pouring down rain, like torrential rain. And so we ran, and we like took cover in the shopping center there. That always played like elevator music on its intercom. It was, we just watched the rainfall. And then another year, I remember I went to pee in some bushes in the park, and I heard this noise that sounded like, piano notes cascading up and down, like somebody's just like going up and down the
How old were you?
keyboard. I think I was 18.
Okay, and how old were you when this previous thing happened?
I think 17.
Okay. Okay.
And so then the notes were just like playing up and down the keyboard, and I saw this like lit window across the street, so I was like, oh, somebody's practicing the piano or something. And so I was like, I called my friends over to look at it, and I was like, oh, this sounds like really beautiful. And so like we walked towards the window, and the sound stopped, like immediately went away. So we were like, oh, I guess they stopped playing. And so then we kept walking, like 3 blocks later, the same sound, but it sounds like it's coming from like the vicinity of this other house, specifically its air conditioning unit. And so like we go towards it, and the sound stops. And so like we just walked around all night, and there was this sound that sounded sometimes like church bells, like a bunch of church bells playing all at once, or like this cascading piano notes. But it kept changing directions, like it was moving around, like it never
and
was
you
like,
and your friends all heard it.
Yeah. So then we finally, but my friend, she had hurt her ankle, so she got tired of walking around looking for the sound. And at the end, basically, I was like really intent on finding it, and she was just kind of limping behind.
Yeah.
So I never found where the source of that sound came from. But I feel like that's, those experiences, I still feel that when I go to Gainesville, that I have some kind of connection to place there that allows me to tap into some other dimension of reality, some like feeling of timelessness. And I can't quite, it's strong, or at least it's stronger there, I think, because I have this pact with the place.
What pact do you have?
I don't know, I guess I think about it as with the land or with the natural environment. I don't know if it's because I grew up there and I just have this familiarity that I can tap into that there, whereas I don't feel it as strongly necessarily.
Like you feel a connection.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like, it's like, is it kind of like, okay, being around a person who you know?
There's that too, you know, like I go and see old friends there.
Yeah.
And then I feel that sense of like being with somebody that knows me. And so it's like, it's a lot like more free flowing our relationship than like more recent friendships that I have here. But it's almost, I don't know if it's quite like, it's like this experience of timelessness, you know, or another sense of time maybe, where you can feel like how long, you know, a tree has been there. For example, like a sense of like place that has this timelessness. Like that's what it feels like to me, that I can tap into that there, and it feels really good to me.
Yeah.
Like it feels it brings me back to life in a certain way. That and the ocean, you know, and so like when I was there, I went into the ocean, and the ocean too, like gives me not quite that feeling of timelessness in Gainesville, but the ocean is really good for me. Like it helps me a lot.
Yeah.
And when I'm in it, you know, even if I'm not surfing, you know, or anything, after I get out, I close my eyes and I can see waves, you know, and I feel the waves in my body. It's almost like in some way the ocean gets inside of me. And it's this feeling of like a force that's, you know, so big. And so I like that I grew up in Florida. I don't know if I really appreciated it as a teenager. And I kind of wanted to get out, to get away. But then I eventually moved back there, and after I finished college, I had a period where when I was 18, where I kind of rebelled and like was wanting to break out of my life as I knew it, and so then I hitchhiked across the country multiple times, and I worked for a traveling carnival for a while, and had a lot of experiences that were.
Did your family know where you were at this time?
No. Well, I had limited contact with them, and no, they didn't. They didn't really know where I was. Yeah, they didn't always know where I was. Yeah, and it worried them, obviously. But those experiences shaped me too. So, and I was always very kind of introverted and shy, and so I think I had this idea that I could, if I had these extreme experiences, I could somehow like break out of my shell and experience life, which I didn't know how to experience. I don't even think I really knew how to feel completely growing up.
You didn't know how to feel?
Yeah, I didn't know like a very large range of emotions, and I wanted to feel something more.
But how do you know, if you had never felt any more than how much you felt, how did you know that there was more to feel? Or was it that you did used to feel, then you stopped feeling as much, and then you wanted to go back to how much you wanted to feel?
I don't know if it was that I definitely had a feeling of being constrained and maybe a feeling of constant tension.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this was some kind of like early childhood thing to do with family or parents that changed or constrained or repressed your personality very early on, where you don't exactly verbally remember the incidents.
Yeah, I feel like I have a memory of what it was like in high school, and then it was kind of like there was tension at home, and then there was tension at school, And I didn't really have a social life, so I kind of just went between those two places. And like at high school, I was kind of like, I just realized this now, but I remember that I lived in a kind of like constant fear, which in some way had to do with my personality, but it was also that I would get, beat up, like people would jump up from behind corners and hit me in the head and run off, or, things like that would happen. And so I was like, afraid to go to the bathroom because there were like no doors on the stalls of the bathroom. And I was like kind of living in fear to a certain way. Like I didn't eat lunch, I didn't. And then at home there was tension that had to do with my parents' relationship, not like arguments and things like that, and kind of like tiptoeing around people. So I think when I look back on it, like that experience and not having like any other outlet to, I don't know if it was that I didn't know how to feel or I just felt like constrained in some way, or like this kind of like tension in my life all the time that I wanted to like break out in some way, but I didn't really know how. Like I didn't rebel in the way that a teenager would like normally rebel in high school, because I didn't have like friends and a social life, and I was kind of like shy. I was very shy. So then I think I like put myself through all these extreme experiences, like working for the carnival, being homeless, hitchhiking, working all kinds of odd jobs, that, was like, put me in like a different form of life, that I was trying to like put myself through extreme experiences, almost sometimes masochistically to like feel something. And it was also a kind of I thought I wanted to be a poet, and there was a romanticization of like, I think I had read, some beat poets or something, and I had this like romantic idea of
like into
hitchhiking
the
and something like that, so there was this, but yeah, it was really difficult in a lot of ways, and eventually it just wasn't feasible. I remember at the end my whole idea was like, I was kind of circling around, like I went from coast to coast and I was circling around, going back to the place I was born. And so I went back to Kansas City. I don't know why I had this idea, but it was like I was going back. I wanted to go back to the place I was born. And so that's where I ended. And at this time it was getting really cold, and this guy who had let me stay at his house like pointed a gun at my head and was like saying he would shoot me if he saw me again. So there was like these different factors where I just kind of, I called home and I asked for a bus ticket. And so then I took the bus back to Florida, and kind of started my life again, getting back on the kind of track that, that I was supposed to be on, or that I had been on, because through high school I'd been like really good student and whatever. And so that was kind of like the track.
Wait, but did this detour fulfill any of its promises of what it was in your mind of like breaking out of this life? And
it did in some ways, like it marked me. When I look back on it now, I ask what the price of that was, being older, because then you realize that some things fuck you up that happened to you, and you're like, was it really worth it to have to put myself through some of this? And you realize that you can't get that back so easily. I don't know, as I got older, because when I was young I didn't really care, because it's just kind of, I was like,
what would you like to have back that you can't get back easily?
I'd like to have back like I'd like to have back the chance to do it a softer, easier way, and to not have experienced some of the trauma that I experienced, and so that I could, imagine, and this is just another imagination where I imagine I could be like more of a normal, stable person. I'm not like, I think if my life on paper looks really stable, but I imagine that my mental health could be better or something, you know, like I could have better, I could basically have better mental health, like be more resilient in that way, be more stable.
But at that time, to that self, it was kind of worth it to make all those decisions.
Yeah, I feel like I was just throwing myself out there. Like I didn't know. I had very little like idea of what could happen, but it exposed me to what can happen to you if you're like a person that's, you know, vulnerable in this system. Like you're treated differently, you know, like you're exposed to all kinds of things that I live in shelter from now, like in an abeyance. And I could have lived my whole life like that because I was set up to do that. Because I wasn't like, you know, like I was set up to go to college. I was set up to have a, you know, middle-class life and all those things. So I don't, you know, I could have like lived in abeyance of that. But it did show me like what can happen to you if you're like, if those protections are like taken off and like you're exposed to like policing or different things in different ways, like you can and if you're just seen by other people as like someone who's without protection and they can take advantage of you, like what people will do in that situation. So I don't know, but yeah, definitely, you know, it changed me. Whereas I think if I would have stayed on the track I was on, I think there was inevitably some kind of explosion that had to happen, you know, because I couldn't keep going on the track that I was on. But I think most people deal with it by like partying a lot in college or something. Yeah. Whereas I could have done that, you know, and like sometimes I'm like, why didn't I just do that? I could have like had like normal fun and
I don't know. Maybe today I would not be here like talking with you. Did all of those things somehow, you know.
Yeah, and it's kind of pointless anyway.
Like how would the rest of your life have turned out if you hadn't done those things? You know, it's very tricky to reason about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I kept having spiritual or supernatural experiences in my 20s. And it's something I realized, you know, when you're asking me about that, it's like I don't really include that in my academic work at all. And I'm not really sure how to do that. But I think it's really important. And going back to Florida makes me feel that again. Like I can feel this sense of like another reality that's... So at any rate, it's kind of like some of my growing up time.
Yeah. And how did you end up like teaching science, religion, and magic at UT?
Well, like, you know, I graduated college. I took 5 or 6. I didn't go back. I didn't think I wanted to go back to school. I took about 5 or 6 years off. Now I say take off. I mean, back then I didn't think I was going to go back to graduate school, but and how do I say this? I mean, it sounds kind of silly, but in my early 20s, I think I was like 23 or 24 or something, I took my first yoga class. And I went into Shavasana and I like lost consciousness again. Like I was kind of like the way I was describing before, where, and I think a lot of people have this experience in Shavasana where you're like not awake but not asleep, but kind of like go off into this other reality and then come back and feel like totally refreshed and new. It was because of the first time I did it, but I felt like a different person when I got out, and it was like, it took me on this whole other trajectory for a while where I was just kind of an itinerant wanderer going around working at different spiritual communities or yoga centers. And so I just kind of lived doing that for a while. And at that time I felt like, you know, the universe would speak to me in different ways, and that I would see, and I felt really happy because I felt this like constant feeling of connection. But sometimes it was also scary, like the experience of like being absorbed in the divine at moments, you know. It wasn't always very kind of comfortable. I was recently doing like a mental health assessment, and he was like assessing me as being bipolar, and he was like, oh yeah, that's one of the forms of mania, is like feeling that, you know, God is like talking to you or something. So for him it was like a kind of psychological imbalance, or a kind of a form of mania. And his interpretation of this whole spiritual interlude was that it came on the heels of a manic episode, and so it like, I don't know if that's true or not, or if it was a spiritual experience, you know, or if it was just my brain chemistry.
Yeah, you're not the first person sharing with me that kind of experience where it's like some kind of like a divine whatever, and then being diagnosed with something like that, like a bipolar or whatever. And I don't know enough about psychology to say, but it's like, yeah, the Western psychology has like a box for that.
Yeah, so like I did that for a while, and then I went back to graduate school. And because of those experiences, you know, I thought I wanted to study spirituality, yoga, etc. So I don't know, I did a lot of, actually the project I proposed was going to Bolivia and studying about, what was it I was going to study about? I don't remember. But, you know, then I thought, oh, I could maybe study in India. And so I went to India for a summer. And then I read about Hinduism in the Caribbean, and I was like, whoa, I could, you know, go to the Caribbean and do this, and it would be closer to home and to Florida. And so then I went to Trinidad because I thought I wanted to study, you know, Hinduism in Trinidad. I had read an article about the Kali Puja there, which is something that was kind of revitalized in the 1970s, starting in Guyana. And then in Trinidad, it was a form of centered on the goddess Kali, but also these other deities that were more associated with South India, Tamil deities, or North Indian deities that were kind of like not part of the Orthodox Brahmanical kind of pantheon. So I thought I wanted to study that. And I went there, and Trinidad is another place where I feel like I have this very strong connection to the place that's almost overpowering at times, because can be so like bipolar, to say lack of a better word, you know. But I met this family there, and I started to like keep going back and seeing this family. And I met the father of the family through a strange coincidence, in that I had this guidebook the first time I went there. It was like the only guidebook that they published on Trinidad was this rough guide, and it was written by a British, I think she was involved in theater or something, but she lived in Trinidad for a while. And the only entry on the place where I ended up doing fieldwork, which like nobody ever goes to, it's like in far south Trinidad, just mentioned this guy. He says, local preacher turned Rastafari gives tours of the creek, and is like a local historian or something like that. And it gave a phone number there. And so I remember like I went down there and I tried to call this phone number, and I was like, is this Narega? His name was Narega. And the guy's like, no. Hung up. And so, I don't know, I was just like walking down the road in this town, and I saw a vegetable stall with some, produce outside of it. And so I went over and I looked at the guy that was sitting inside, and I said, "Are you Narega?" And he was like shocked. He was like, because it's not really a place where tourists go, or there's no foreigners. And so he's like, and this guy just shows up and he's like, "How did you know my name?" And this like white foreigner comes in and knew his name. And I was like, you're in this book? Like there's this guidebook, and I showed him the guidebook and I showed him his name, and he was like shocked. He was like, "Whoa, like I didn't know that." And he's like, "Yeah, I lost my phone." After that that was like something that he did often, was lose his phone. Even one time we bought him this like giant phone that like looked like a house phone, just because like thinking that he wouldn't lose it. He's like, "Oh no, I lost my phone," and so then that's how I met him. And so like I developed this relationship with him over years. And he was a small farmer. He was a preacher turned Rastafari. Like he had grown up really strongly in the Seventh-day Adventist church, and became the minister. I don't know if they use that word, but minister of the local church there. But then he started to have these experiences where he started to question the Bible and the doctrines of the Seventh-day Adventist church. And he saw that, because in the Seventh-day Adventists, they have to tithe, they call it tithes, a certain percentage of their salary to the church. And so he started to question that, because he's like, the headquarters of that church is in the U.S. And he experienced like racism from higher up foreign Seventh-day Adventists. And so he was like, began to feel like he was just basically tricking poor black people into like giving their money and going to the U.S.
Yeah.
And so then he, started to question the Bible, and he was like, started to question like whether the Bible was really just a book written by humans and full of contradictions. And so he began to like preach about this stuff, and people like called him a madman. They said he had gone mad. He also started to grow dreadlocks, which was like very stigmatized at that point in the Caribbean, in Jamaica or Trinidad. And he began to grow dreadlocks, and people started to call him crazy, mad, and they like threw him out of the church, and he lost all of his business contacts, because the churches there like that, they operate, there's like a whole network, it's like a business network, social network, economic network.
Oh, okay.
So he had opened a business, and he had, through a loan from somebody else in his church, but they called in their loans, he lost his little shop where he would sell stuff. And so then he entered this period of like the struggle, as he calls it, where, he had to like question everything that he knew. And people thought that he had gone mad, because basically he would just go to the river every day and would like clean the stones on the river and try to like clean the water.
Really?
And so people would like see, because he felt like, he said later on, he felt like the water was like flowing through his brain, and he was like cleaning his brain at the same time that he was trying to clean the river.
Oh. And
so he started to have these, that's why he would give tours of the river. I think this woman met him at this time where he was just like obsessed with the river, or devoted to the river. He would just go down there and clean. He got arrested for marijuana possession. A lot of things happened that were hard, but then he started to grow baji, which like grows like a weed there, and it's what they call baji there is something. It's a kind of amaranth they use the leaf of. It's a word that comes from South Asia. I don't know if it means the same thing in India, but he would grow baji, which just like grows like a weed, and he would start to like get out of his economic problems by just like selling baji. And then he started to farm on what used to be a U.S. military base in World War II, and so it was like abandoned land, and he began to farm on this really steep hillside. And so that's when I met him, and he had just started to kind of, not just started, he'd been doing it for a little bit, but he was, starting to do this kind of small scale sustainable farming. And this was informed by this Rastafari ethos of like self-determination, autonomy, trying to have an autonomous existence where you don't have to work for the state, or you don't have to work for like a company or something like that. So, and there isn't much of that employment anyway where he lives, but this farming, he was trying to like have a model for other people in the community about what they could do if they would farm food crops, because that was a stigmatized thing, because plantations and plantation labor existed there till the mid 1900s, and people wanted to get away from that, and they left a stigmatization of farming food crops. So I met him, and that's how I got into the work that I do, was like living with that family, staying there with them. And the region where they live is kind of stigmatized in the national imaginary as a place of obia, which was a term that was criminalized and which came to include a lot of different things, but popularly means like African tradition, and spiritual work really is what it is. It's like spiritual helping, healing, problem solving that a spiritual worker will do for people that have problems. And so that region got like conflated with that term obia. And so it kept coming up in all these major episodes, in protests against police violence, in episodes in which local young women kind of went mad, or so to speak, so they called it. And so I started working about obia, and I still was interested in like the Kali Puja and the Hindu stuff, because they could also people would also say they're doing obia. And so I kept going to different Kali Puja temples, but really was focusing on the African side of religion there. And so that's kind of how I got to do what I do today. It was like through those connections that I made there, and then just living there and kind of experiencing. I knew that I wanted to do something with religion. The science came in because a synonym for obia, which is criminalized, it's still technically criminalized in a lot of the Caribbean, which means like, in a derogatory way, people would call it, in the region too, they would call it witchcraft. But the synonym for obia is science, and so science can be used like obia. And so if you call somebody a science man, that could be something similar to calling somebody an obia man. And so I started to get interested in how obia could help us and how the practice of spiritual work could help us to understand science in a different way. Like, why were these people talking about science as this stigmatized term? Because it seems like science was this, really authoritative word. But I learned that people weren't. So earlier scholars had thought, they're using science to kind of give some legitimacy to these stigmatized practices. But really what I learned is that they're actually like theorizing about science in really interesting ways. And a part of the reason why science is equivalent to obia is that both terms can be ambivalent. And so science involves risk, danger, experimentation, and real ethical and moral quandaries. And that's something that's in a more celebratory or cleaned up version of science is removed from it, but most people who have some more nuanced idea of science, which includes practicing scientists, and I also started to read the philosophy of science studies, know that science isn't divorced from real ethical problems. And so Obia recognized that the potential ambivalence of science, its danger even, and really thought about the ethical questions of using hard to perceive powers to do things.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like what a lot of science does too. Going back to the scientific revolution, it was all about the invisible forces. And that's what made it break with medieval Aristotelian, science or natural philosophy. So I started to get interested in how Obia can help us to like understand science in a different way, rather than just seeing it as a legitimating mask for African identified practices, and also trying to break down that division between science as being assumed to be Western, European, and then on the other end of the spectrum, African tradition assumed to be traditional, non-scientific, whatever, to try to break down that dichotomy, which, is really structures like stereotypical ways of thinking about the relationship between science and sub-Saharan Africa in general. So that's how I got interested in magic, science, and religion. And I teach the class because it's some of the problems in early anthropology in which these categories of magic, science, and religion were central. I'm interested in kind of deconstructing those problems and the divisions between those categories.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, because I feel like a lot of people would be like, oh, how can you put all those three words in the same, like, it's especially the science elitists would be like, science is a different thing, like religion and magic, to suggest that there is any kind of porosity between the three is kind of almost like offensive to the scientists, maybe.
Yeah, what's interesting is that magic really doubled for science in the anthropological discourse. And so they were rather it would be religion that was in a different category. But then also like science and religion weren't considered as separate antagonistic to each other until like really the late 1800s, early 1900s. So there's a lot, but for the anthropologists, magic was like science. They called it, magic was kind of like for them primitive science, but it was like science in that it was instrumental in trying to do something in the world by manipulating natural forces.
It's technology.
Yeah,
it's like invisible psychic technology.
Yeah, it's more like it's more actually like technology, and so I'll also have to consider the difference between science and technology. But and like there's famous people that what's that science fiction writer Arthur C. Miller said, any sufficiently developed magic is technology, or any sufficiently developed technology is a form of magic, or something like that.
Yeah, is indistinguishable from magic. Yeah. Oh, so that's interesting. I noticed another little mini coincidence, maybe, that I went to Florida just a few years back. By the way, I didn't know that you were also went to Florida.
Yeah.
But the coincidence was that I told you about this. Like I got in this Uber, and the guy was from Haiti or Bahamas or something, and he started talking about the prevalence of magic and we had this great conversation. He turned out to be a pastor, and I put the podcast up, and I told you about the podcast, and now I was like, oh, it's such an interesting premonition. Like I feel like I'm about to come back and have more conversations about this particular thing, like this region of the world where there's this kind of stuff with Brent. And so what are the odds that I would, run into a person and the conversation was so cool in an Uber that itself would be a podcast episode. And now I'm here and you're like, oh yeah, you were in Florida and the vicinity of the Caribbean to the Florida. And so like all of this is just like kind of emerging now as like it's like a connected a bunch of dots connecting each other that are all arising at the same time, like the Haiti, like, you know, whatever. There's just a bunch of, yeah. I don't know. I think my previous self would have scoffed at, like, Neil, you're like seeing coincidences like too much. Your brain is becoming like one of those peoples that just see profound coincidence, divine intervention everywhere. Because I've met some people like that in the past that I have internally scoffed at. I'm like, oh my God, your standards for what you consider, whoa, that was crazy, is like pretty low. Like, you know, you should have like you were like, what are the odds? Yeah, okay. I mean, the odds of anything happening is like kind of small. And, you know, it's not as crazy as you think. Like, you know, your life is actually duller. But I used to think, oh yeah, I think you just need to cook up some kind of story in your head to make your life feel special. And now I feel like I'm kind of doing the same thing. Yeah, but sometimes the coincidence is a little bit much though. And it's not just a coincidence where it doesn't feel to me, some of these cases, it's not really just a coincidence where it's like, oh, I saw incident A and then incident B, and I'm like, oh, and I'm sitting thinking about it, connecting the two and saying that it's a coincidence. No, sometimes in addition to that, there's even a premonition. Like there's a certain feeling that arises at the same time that the coincidence is about to happen or has happened, where there's a part of me that kind of knows, or some part of the universe like indicates or whatever, just a sense. And it's a slightly strange sense. And then the coincidence happens. So I'm like, oh, this is not me just passively observing two things, and then my rational mind just goes in and says, oh, if you connect these two, that's kind of interesting. It's not that. It's associated with something that happens within me also. And so regardless of how much my mind can say that may have happened out of chance or whatever, you're just like ascribing meaning to it like after. There's some part of me that to some extent knew something about it, which makes it feel more like that coincidence. It's like that kind of God that I was talking about, who's like kind of like me and like likes to fuck with my head, but in a kind of playful way, and kind of like just before the thing happens comes to like, hoo, this thing, and it just goes away, and then the thing happens. Yeah, it's weird. So, you know, after I took your course, I was like, I want him on my podcast. And I have a list, like iCloud notes on my phone, where I wrote down a question for you. Just a question. Yeah. It just said, have you ever experienced anything that you believe was magic? I think you already kind of told me like a little bit of that. But will you say there's anything else, like anything that you experienced? Or I don't know if you consider, you know, like the flash of light and all of those things, I don't know if you consider them as magic.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on what we mean by magic, you know. You were talking earlier about coincidence, and that sometimes you have a premonition, like you can feel something before it's about to happen. I think, I know what you mean. I told that story about the alligator where it wasn't even like I was trying to conjure that into existence, the presence of an alligator in the spring. But I think things like that do happen. It's kind of like dreams, you know. Sometimes I have dreams that seem so real, but it doesn't necessarily mean, it doesn't mean anything in particular all the time. And like I can have premonitions of things that don't happen. Somehow though, sometimes they match up, because I think we probably live in a world of like so many possibilities at every second. And sometimes I can feel like I'm in the flow of life, and then it's more likely to happen that I'll experience something that I would consider luck or a magical coincidence. And so I guess it's like the extent to which somehow my spirit or soul is like matching up with the flow of existence.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time there's enough interference that they're not really in sync.
Yeah.
So I think that could be mad. And I've had experiences that where it does feel like there's something magical or spiritual or something like luck or coincidence that's operating in my life, you know. And sometimes I also feel totally out of sync with the world and like separate from existence.
Oh, you do? Yeah. I feel like you've had multiple like dissociative experiences.
Yeah. Yeah.
So have I in my life, starting from a young age.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know why. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I've had experiences where, yeah, I would say the one word to summarize it now that I would use is kind of dissociative, where I get like pulled away from my identity and then kind of dropped back, and it's kind of like hard to take the identity so seriously anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it causes, I think, a sense of alienation from other human beings whose sense of identity and reality is very solid, and the sense of reality about the concerns of life or what is to be taken seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I don't know. Despite this, and despite like there's being some kind of subconscious sense that this is a magic dream, and it's going to end, it's going to be replaced by some other magic dream or whatever. Like nothing like really matters in the way that you think would matter if it was really as solid as we think it is. But it's kind of made of dream stuff. But still, I take like the concerns appear and I like get very serious about them and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. Also, Western psychology doesn't like dissociation. It's like, oh, this is like some kind of a way of the engine is breaking down. So it's like some kind of an episode or a malfunction of the mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's associated with trauma.
Yeah.
PTSD.
But like this losing or blurring of identity is something that is even like, I would say it's not stigmatized, but even prized in like some Eastern spiritual paths, where you're like, okay, one get to have like a bird's eye view.
Yeah, I also learned that through, studying practices that involved a lot of spirit manifestation, where, and it basically is like somebody can inhabit a whole nother personality when a deity is manifesting in them, when they become like a very different personality.
Yeah.
And it's often experienced not as a pleasant thing at first, it's experienced as like an intrusion or some kind of affliction. And people have to like learn how to live with this whole other being.
Yeah.
Like in their own body, or in their house, in their life. But it can be cultivated and prized. And yeah, I mean, I remember one guy telling me, he was like, some woman was telling his girlfriend, like, "Oh, it must be nice to be with that guy," and he was like, "Yeah, but try living with me, I never know who I'm gonna wake up as." Because he met like lived with these spirits and all these different kinds of that had different personalities, basically.
And he would just wake up as one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I asked the driver. I was like, why do these things happen down there, but not so much in the United States? Like, you're talking about this in the same way that he was talking about it, in that, yeah, it's all real. Like, no one's faking it. Like, these phenomena are actually happening, right?
Well, I mean, people can fake it. I mean, that's something that people are always reasoning about in spirit manifestation ceremonies. Is like, is that an authentic manifestation? And and some people could say somebody's just doing it to get attention. They like the attention. So there's a critical attitude towards that, even within those traditions, or especially within those traditions. And spirit manifestation happens in the U.S. too. Like, there's a lot of practices of that here as well. And not everybody in the Caribbean practices spirit manifestation. It's like a minority of people that actually like do that. So I don't know, like, I wouldn't say it doesn't happen in the U.S. Because there's things like spiritualism that was like a Western movement that's all about mediumship, and there's Pentecostal churches that have Holy Spirit manifestation. It's a lot of happens here too, and so I think though that there actually is a critical attitude towards whether a manifestation is authentic or not, or real or not. But it's definitely recognized that this is a real thing that can happen.
Yeah. What are your religious views?
I didn't really grow up with any religion or in any religion, although, I guess, like, my father was, I guess, I don't know if he identified as an atheist, but he didn't like religion, which meant basically Christianity. So there's a kind of like crypto-Christian probably upbringing, because like that's the milieu that my parents came out of. Even though my father wasn't brought up religious, my mother wasn't really either. But I don't know, my religious views. I think that, ritual can be important. Prayer can be important just by like focusing on doing something every day, or focusing on saying something can really help to direct one's energy towards something. Like I said, I've had these experiences where I do feel like there's something more to reality than a kind of Western naturalistic explanation of things.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I'm open. I just try to be open to different experiences and ways of being in the world. And I think that's why maybe I like to study religion, because it's the ability to try to understand or even inhabit different ways of seeing the world.
Yeah.
So I just try to be open to different things. Not get caught up in the question of whether something's real or not.
Okay. Okay. That's pretty open. You don't even have to decide if it's real or not.
Yeah, I mean, that's like a pragmatist approach, where it's like, what is the effect, or what does it do? What is the power of this? Rather than like, is this real? Is this true or false?
I see. Yeah. What do you think will happen to you after you die?
Well, I think that with that experience I told you about, where I was like floating in outer space, it kind of felt like maybe that was something, like it could have been something like a near-death experience, or a little taste of what it could feel like. In the sense that, I think that when we die, we won't have bodies, and so we won't have the same capacities and won't have the same sense of time or the feeling of like will that I might have now, where I'm like, I want to go here, I want to go there, where I'm moving my body from one place to another. So I think maybe it is something like that, where it's like and that if I trust that experience, it would be like there still is some consciousness, but it doesn't have a body and it doesn't have the sense of time that we have.
And does it have feelings?
I don't know. I mean, it didn't have feelings in the way that I understand them. Or emotions, I guess. Some people, I don't know what the difference between feelings and emotions are, but it didn't really seem to have emotions like that. So many of my emotions are tied in with just the ebbs and flows of life, and the little dramas, and the concern about myself, concern about what's going to happen to me, about the future and everything. It's very much based on a kind of linear past, present, future, anticipatory, regretful framework. So I don't know if there would be those emotions.
But when you went away to that outer space and you're like, okay, here I am, I don't have a body, I have a sense of self, there's no time. Was there anything like, fuck, I would really like to be a human being again? Or, fuck, when does this end? Or, fuck, I don't have any friends. Anything like that? Was there anything like that?
No.
Oh.
And in those times when I kind of lose the sense of self, like in that, when I had that first experience of the Shavasana or other experiences I've had, when I do come back, I mean, that particular time in Florida, I felt scared a little bit, like freaked out. But usually when it happens, I feel great.
Yeah.
For like a little while after.
I see.
Because I'll come to and I won't remember who I am. For a very brief, for like a few, I don't know if it's just like a few seconds, but there'll be this little interstitial period where it's like, I won't remember who I am, because I don't remember who I am. I see everything so clearly, so vividly. Like I can feel, feel like I can just experience everything so directly.
Yeah.
But then it comes back, who I am, where I am, what I have to do. That kind of thing.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of some like deep meditation sessions. Like sometimes I've opened my eyes at the end of a meditation session, and it's like the flow of life and the taste of it that was happening right as I closed my eyes, this kind of faded away. And the familiarity of the context of my life has kind of had enough time to just like decay away. So that when I open my eyes, I don't remember as I'm opening them what the scene was even in front of my eyes. So I'll open my eyes and I'm like, oh, there's a lot of trees in front of me. And then for some time, it's like the mind is more empty and it just takes in the view, like the cup of awareness fills a lot with just that. And it's as if you're seeing it like a child sees it. It's like their mind just like fills with it because there isn't narrative chatter going on top of it. So it feels like a new experience just looking at a tree. And then it all starts coming back slowly. It's like, oh, it's a tree. Oh yeah, this is where I was sitting when I closed my eyes. Oh, okay. Well, I can just sit here for a little bit. I guess my mind isn't really talking all that much. Oh, that's talking. Yeah, now I'm talking. Okay, well, that's talking. But I still feel pretty good. Well, what time is it? Should I have to get up right now? I guess I should get up because, I did the meditation. I had to do the meditation for 15 minutes a day. I did 30 minutes. That was very good. Okay, let's get up. All right.
Yeah, it all comes back.
It all comes back. And I just believe in all of it again. I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta do this thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I had that experience recently when I had to take these antibiotics, and there's this one antibiotic that was interacting with another medicine that I was taking, so that basically I think the serotonin levels in my brain were just doubled or something.
Oh wow.
And
wow.
I kind of had that feeling, that same feeling. Yeah, I was just I could really directly experience the world.
Was there some kind of a come down from that?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, it pushed me a little. I got a little too excited.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no free lunch. What do you think that was? These experiences that you have had, which are kind of what I might call slightly sort of paranormal experiences, in that these are not normal. These are not normal experiences. Like that flash where you went away to outer space and then you came back. Do you have any understanding or theory or anything about what is that?
Well, it could have been that lightning struck close, very close to us.
Yeah.
And that just filled us with electricity.
Okay.
But even then, that's still magical, that's a natural thing.
Filled it with electricity, and then why would you be in outer space?
Yeah, I guess it just it just zapped me or something. I don't know. I don't know if other people have that experience when they're struck by lightning.
Mm.
I don't think I was directly hit because usually I was reading about it and there's some marker, an entry point.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Have you checked your third eye region? Just kidding.
Or that serotonin thing, that just be a natural explanation.
Yeah.
But then there's something else where I feel yeah, I mean, I guess lately I've been thinking, whoa, it is just really brain chemicals, and sometimes that can totally change my reality if my brain chemistry is.
Yeah, that's also magic to me.
Yeah, it's because it can be night and day in terms of how I experience the world based on my brain.
Yeah.
Chemistry.
Yeah.
I think in terms of a spiritual path, it's also important to do things that are a little bit less flashy, but they're maintenance,
Yeah.
Something about how I act in the world, or that's more slow and less flashy.
Yeah.
And more just
praying
every day even though I don't feel like it, or something like that, or meditating every day even though I don't. Not every day, because I never do everything every day.
Yeah.
But doing something when it's not, the biggest meditation experience I've ever had.
Yeah, totally. I think the flashy stuff runs out if you just keep going after the flashy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But these practices that you're talking about are actually kind of renewing practices, where as if you're tilling the soil and random fruit falls out of the heaven into your lap, that's fine. But if you till the soil, you're going to have your own fruits.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for hanging with Brent and me today in the Room of Lives. Take care. Until next time.